Hi, everyone. May peace be on you all, and welcome to this season's very first Gift of the Gab. And I can't begin to express how excited I am for my guest, Evelyn Alsultany. And I'm going through your bio, Evelyn, okay? And as I told you before, you are the reason, you are the culmination of everything I've been trying to do with my podcast. But please, let me give you a proper intro. You are the leading expert on the history of representation of Arabs and Muslims in the U.S. media. You've authored the book Broken, The Failed Promise of Muslim Inclusion. That's what we're going to talk about today. And you've also authored, Arabs and Muslims in the Media, Race and Representation After 9/11. You are an associate professor at the Department of American Studies and Ethnicities at the University of Southern California. And you teach courses on the history of racism. And you've also co-founded and served as the director of Arab and Muslim American Studies program in the University of Michigan. You also serve as an educator and consultant for Hollywood studios like Netflix, Universal Studios, and you've also co-authored the Obeidi-Alsultany Test, which basically helps big media companies properly represent Muslims in the media. Or it's basically a test of what do you measure against when it comes to proper representation, as opposed to stereotype representation. And again, it's a whole lot of information, but I am so happy to have you here, Evelyn. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for inviting me, and I love your show so much, and I'm honored to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you so much. Again, the honor is all mine. And the thing is, with my Gift of the Gab, everybody knows who've watched it, is that we have difficult conversation, but I was very torn because I wanted to do you as a feature because I have your book right here. And if anybody can see it on my YouTube channel, it's got a whole lot of cat tabs here. I'm like, I want to discuss this, and everything is it's all all the pencil markings are in there. And I wanted to do a feature that's usually in my whole Muslim segment. But Gift of the Gab is where we have the difficult discussions, Evelyn. And when it comes to Muslim representation, it's a very hard and tricky subject. So you're part of my Gift of the Gab. If I had to start out anywhere, please, for everyone, please pick up Broken if you want to really get an understanding of how Muslim representation has been skewed and sort of has evolved over the years. This is absolutely fantastic. So it's Broken, The Failed Promise of Muslim Inclusion. So let's start, I guess, from the very beginning, Evelyn. I mean, Muslim representation is not a real, moneymaker study, especially not when you started off with it. How did you get into this?
Yeah. Before I get started, I wanted to ask you, what movies or TV shows did you grow up with where there were Muslim characters?
When I grew up, there was absolutely zero.
Nothing.
There's nothing. Nothing.
You can't think of nothing.
I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
I grew up in another part of the world, so we had Bollywood over there, some Muslim representation, but Western media, absolutely nothing.
Nothing. When I was growing up in the 80s, there was a lot of invisibility, but then when I did see Muslims, it was often in the context of terrorism. So
right.
Back to the Future. I loved Back to the Future. And then there's this Libyan terrorist that shows up. Yeah. I loved Indiana Jones movies. And then you're in ancient Egypt or these ancient civilizations digging up artifacts that only the West values.
Right.
And then there's a lot of just killing of Arab people. They're just dumb.
And even Aladdin, I think that was the closest full Muslim representation, and I say that in air quotes. But again, it's so problematic. It was so problematic.
Yes, I didn't grow up with Aladdin. I had already grown by then, but I've been teaching students for a long time, and many of them say Aladdin is all we had.
Yeah, and Aladdin is all we had.
Yeah, when they get to my class, they're like, wow, we didn't realize how racist it was. If we cut off your ear, if we don't like your face, it's barbaric. But hey, it's home. And Jasmine and Aladdin have American sounding accents, and everyone else has non-American accents. And there's just so much in there. But that's all they had, and they loved it so much. So it speaks a lot to that. I've spoken to so many people who are either Muslim or Arab or of any, even Black, Latinx, various identities that they struggled as a kid, except reconciling who they are because of all these messages that made them feel like there was something wrong with them. And then later on in life, realizing, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just in a system of meaning that marginalizes me. So I'm one of those people too, that I grew up embarrassed about my identities. My dad was Iraqi, Muslim, Shia. My mom was Catholic, Cuban. My stepmom, Catholic, Colombian. And everywhere we went, where are you from? Where are you from? Where are you? So, I mean, we grew up in New York, which is a multicultural city. I mean, there are people from everywhere there. And so you could say, oh, well, where are you from is a common question that you would ask in a multicultural city, but it was a loaded question. And so I started watching my dad say he was from Turkey instead of Iraq. And using the name Ken instead of Kamal, Ken from Turkey instead of Kamal from Iraq. And as a young girl, I didn't understand. And my stepmom would say she was from Spain instead of Colombia. And then I caught on quickly. Oh, when they say where they're from, then they have to talk about terrorism. They have to talk about cocaine and drug dealing. They have to talk about how they make their money. And so I think when I got to college and started learning in a different way, and also, out of that fragile childhood state where, you don't really have self-reflection and analysis and you're just impacted, I just started putting things together. And sure, it's not only the media that sends these messages, but I was a pop culture junkie growing up. I was watching MTV all the time. I was obsessed.
Yeah.
And so that's where it started, and it really took a turn for me after 9/11 because I was watching the television. I was glued to the TV like everyone else was, trying to understand what had happened. And I started seeing, I expected, okay, now we're going to see more terrorism. Now that this happened, get ready, everybody, more terrorists that are Muslim. And that did happen to a certain extent, more ripped from the headlines. But what I didn't expect was this patriotic Muslim character to emerge.
Right.
And so I started examining, what is this? What's happening?
Right. But when I was reading your book, I was reading the introduction, it's just like you had mentioned that post 9/11, like before 9/11, you had started doing representation studies, but it was not one of those things. It's like taking liberal arts in college. What are you going to do afterwards? Sort of situation. But after 9/11, people wanted you. So how did that happen, or why did that happen?
Yeah, I got to college and I started learning. I took women's studies classes, and there were African American studies and Latinx studies and all these ways to learn more about the world we live in and who we are in relation to the social political world. And I was desperate. I want to learn about Arabs and I want to learn about Muslims. Oh, you want to learn about Muslims? You go to religious studies, Islam 101, and you learn about the history of the religion. Okay, that's great. And I took that class, but I want to know about how we are experiencing our identities in the United States. And similarly, as an Arab, you go to Middle East studies, learn about the Middle East. And no, I need to learn about what it's been like to be Arab in this country where we are unrecognizable racially. We're not white, we're not black. Some might identify as white, but my family, we are not white. And so how do you talk about this? And so I was struggling.
Arab is a very broad term. That's the thing.
Yes.
It's not proper to say someone is Arab. Or it's like saying that if, like, from my part of the world, if somebody said I was Indian, and the thing is, I wouldn't take offense, but I'm not technically Indian. I could be Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. It's all from the same part of the world, but you can't call them one thing.
Yes. There's a lot of specificity in this very, very broad category.
Right.
So when I went to grad school in 99, I had a proposal. I want to figure out how to talk about Arabs in ethnic studies in the context of race in the United States. And there were scholars in the 90s who were grappling with this question, but it wasn't mainstream. And my advisor said, you know what? Pick another topic. This is a great topic, but you're not going to get a job. You're going to spend 6 years getting a PhD. And so you should, if you want to do race in the US, do Latino studies, you know. You're Latinx. There's like a market for this. Their jobs, do that. Or if you're interested in the Middle East and Muslims, do gender in Islam. Like there's this thing about, you know, feminist interpretations of the Quran and the experiences of Muslim women.
Right.
And I actually took the advice. I was like, okay, I'm still going to do what I want to do. But for my exams, like you have to do these qualifying exams. I had like a women in Islam list. I had a Latino studies list. I was like all over the map.
Right.
And then 9/11 happened and people are like, wow, your project is cutting edge. And there was an opening suddenly, like this horrific event happened that impacted Muslim life all over the world, destroyed people's lives.
Right.
And then there's this opening where then, you know, I could get a job. And I would talk to one of my colleagues, like people are being detained, deported, killed, and we're getting jobs. So we're going to do the best we can, educate people on what's happening.
Right. And that's where you start off in your book, is just that, pre 9/11, there was like this very limited, and it's always often like this almost like awful barbaric representation of people from the Middle East or those who are Muslims. And it was negative, but not exactly, I guess, or maybe like you could say that they were like attacking and so on and so forth. And they were always the enemy in a sense. But post 9/11, you, in your book, broke down that Muslims emerged in two contexts. And then there's a third one that comes much afterwards. So if you could explain that post 9/11, there's definitely the conversation that, and again, there was a lot of backlash against Muslims, but then we had to sort of create, or the media had to create a certain image of Muslims for them to be acceptable within the U.S. So please explain that.
Yeah, so I'll mention that before 9/11, all the terrorist characters that we're so familiar with, and there was a construction of Arab and Muslim as the same identity. And right now we're in a process of disentangling those identities. But for most of Hollywood's history, it's been one and the same. The Arab and Muslim are the same. And terroristic is basically since the creation of the State of Israel in the 1967 war. That's where the terrorist image emerges, and it just intensifies through several political events, such as the oil embargo in 1973. We get this greedy oil sheik who's a threat to the U.S. economy, and then with the Iran hostage crisis in 79, we have a threat to American families and hostage-taking themes, and so it's just been an intensification of that. So after 9/11, it's not as if, suddenly 9/11 happened and Arabs and Muslims are racialized and demonized and threats to national security. We've been primed for decades to get to that point. And then what happens after 9/11 is that some community organizations like the Council on American Islamic Relations, the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, they want to talk to media producers like 24, the TV drama 24, because they're concerned if we continue to portray Arabs and Muslims as terrorists, it's just going to add fuel to the fire. And it's so dangerous right now with the Patriot Act being passed and special registration and all these policies and going to war. And the result of that advocacy work was this patriotic Muslim. And there are patriotic Muslims before 9/11. So The Siege has one, and Not Without My Daughter has one. Three Kings has one, but it becomes standardized. So that's what my first book is looking at. The standardization of the quote-unquote patriotic good Muslim happens after 9/11.
I'm going to pause you right there. So what's bad about the patriotic Muslim? It seems like a nice stick. What's the problem here?
It sure
what's
does.
The problem, Evelyn? I see no reason for this to be a problem.
And when I first started seeing it, I felt comfort. I felt good. I was like, this is... And then I started looking at it. And so on the surface, is it better? Sure. But it's limited because first, we still have a story about terrorism, and then you're good or bad in the context of terrorism.
Right.
Second, you can only be good if you are patriotic in a very narrow sense of the term. So what if your patriotism is ensuring that the U.S. it holds its ideals of democracy? Instead, it's you're patriotic, you agree with U.S. policies, you're not going to question it, you just go along with it. But the main thing I found was that a lot of these sympathetic, positive images were actually making at least liberals feel good. Oh, and there were all these patriotic characters in contexts where there was a lot of remorse. Storylines where it was, oh, it's so terrible that we have to racially profile. We are against racial profiling, but we're in a state of national emergency and we have to. We're so sorry. And so there was a lot of remorseful feelings, and then you'd have this patriotic character. And in a sense, it was making the public feel good that we're not as racist as we think we are. But meanwhile, we're going to go to war in Iraq that had nothing to do with 9/11, and we're going to kill 150,000 civilians. But it's really not, it's not as bad as you think. So I'm looking at how it was like a false comfort and how it was actually operating to conceal and perpetuate very racist, damaging practices against Muslims. And it doesn't mean that the people who are doing it are having these ulterior motives, but it's feeding a narrative and then underlying your question about what's wrong with it. As you know, what's also wrong with it is, well, how can we be as Muslims? So we're acceptable if we're patriotic. Okay, thank you.
Right.
Period.
And that's the thing. That's what you bring up in your book. It's just that we then have to prove the patriotism. It's a very that's the thing. I think people don't realize the amount of influence media has on our very existences. I could be walking down the street and I'm just like a regular person. I'm doing my groceries. Somebody could come up and be like, "You're a terrorist. You have to prove your patriotism to me." And that's it's not something that people think about, but for Muslims, it's always this underlying anxiety that we have, is that somebody is going to be out there asking us to prove that we're worthy of being here, even though both of us born in this country, we have a right to be here. But just because of that stereotype, it's just like people will be out there, okay, we've seen the patriotic Muslim, how are you patriotic sort of situation?
Yes, and some studies have shown, there's a professor at Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, who's done a study that shows that when we consume images of Muslims as violent repeatedly, that viewers are more likely to support war in Muslim majority countries, more likely to support civil liberty restrictions on Muslims in the US. And then there was another study about the New York Times from an organization called 416 Labs, and they looked at over 2 decades of New York Times reporting that showed that over 50% of stories attribute terrorism to collective responsibility. So we are all responsible. We all have to speak. I don't know anything about terrorism, but I have to speak to you. Have to speak to it.
Right.
I don't know anything about the oppression of Muslim women, but you know what? You got to talk about it. You have to be prepared to speak on behalf of the community. And so these stories are powerful. Stories are not, I've heard so much in doing this work, it's just entertainment. We all know it's just entertainment, but it's not just entertainment. No, it's not policy making. No, you're creating a story. It is not creating policy. You are not deciding to go kill someone, but what you are producing, as you said, if someone walks up to you in the store, what do they know about who Muslims are? Well, the stories we're consuming. And after 9/11, whole lot of terrorism, whole lot of threats to national security. And then there's the good one.
Yeah.
Are you the good one?
Yeah, exactly. And first was the Patriot. The other that came out, you had said, was the Informant. If you could please elaborate on that. Because that was interesting. I was like, I never thought about that, but yeah.
Yeah. So the Informant is part of the Patriot, but the second one actually is the secular Muslim. who I also refer to through Bill Maher's language as the nominal Muslim.
Yes,
so this is a Muslim character who is Muslim in name only, but Islam is irrelevant to their lives. And so in the so I'm thinking about Aziz Ansari, for example, or Kumail Nanjiani, and it's no judgment on how they are as Muslims. Like, there's diversity in our community. Some are secular, some are religious, some are in the middle, some are whatever. But the point is, what becomes acceptable in terms of how Muslims can be portrayed in the media? So that's my big question. And so we have the patriot responding to the terrorist.
Right.
Okay, the terrorist, it's a bad stereotype. Throw in a patriotic one and then the stereotype won't be so bad. We have this fanatic. You can't reason with them. They're just these extremist religious fanatics. Well, how about if we have secular Muslims and show that not all of them are fanatics? So then we have this category emerge, and we start seeing the possibility for secular Muslims. And great, that's a part of who we are. But what else? Who else are we? Is it only these two categories? In the book, I refer to it as stereotype confined expansions, and that they're limited. So you have a stereotype, you respond to it, and then you're confined by the stereotype. It's not just you're a person.
Right. And that's the thing. You had also mentioned that Muslim representation is reactive when it comes to the media. What does that mean? Like, what does it mean that media is reactive to Muslim representation?
Yeah. So we could say reactive in the sense that there's a political event and you're ripping from the headlines. And then all you get is terrorism for decades and decades because of the headlines are all about war and conflict. Then it can be reactive that, the Council on American Islamic Relations is on us, so let's throw in a patriot. Right. Or it could be, the big one was responses to the Muslim ban.
Yes. Yeah.
So Donald Trump, 2015 on the campaign trail before he becomes president, utters his idea, we got to ban Muslims until we figure out what the hell is going on.
Right.
Okay. And then Hollywood responded. And we end up having an expansion in representations of Muslims that we've never seen before.
Right.
Whether we're at the promised land, not yet. I don't know if we're going to get there, but significant changes. And I have a few examples that I wrote down because I forget them. We got, right now we have Hulu's Rami. We have Mo on Netflix. We have Ms. Marvel on Disney Plus.
Yes.
We Are Lady Parts, which is my favorite, on Peacock. Sort of, which is about a transgender Pakistani Muslim on HBO Max. And these are 5 shows that are written by Muslims. And I would put them in a separate category because they're finally, people are telling their own stories. So we have those. But then we have other stories that are not written by Muslims where you have the inclusion of a Muslim. So there's a show called FBI. And it sounds like the patriotic Muslim, but it's not that. It's a Dick Wolf show. He did Law and Order and Law and Order SVU, and now he has FBI. And one of the 2 leading FBI agents is played by Zico Zaki, and his character is an Arab Muslim character, and he's just, going case by case. So that is significant. We have DC Legends of Tomorrow. There's an Iranian Muslim superhero. This happened after the whole Muslim ban thing. 911 Lone Star, there is an Arab Muslim woman in a hijab as a firefighter. The Bull Type had the first lesbian Muslim on television. It was an Iranian Muslim character. Lena Waite's The Shy has the rapper Common playing an imam. LL Cool J came out as Muslim on an episode of NCIS. Even shows like Love Victor, there's Raheem, his friend, who's an gay Iranian Muslim. Alison Abdullah on Orange is the New Black is a Muslim prison inmate. And Transplant is a show out of Canada that was on NBC, and it's about a Syrian refugee doctor who's Muslim. So we have these stories, context outside of terrorism, creating characters. There are more than this. Tan France on Queer Eye is another example, where we're seeing diversity of Muslim identities, experiences. So there was a response. Here's what I want to know. There was a serious response after Muslim ban.
Right.
That response did not happen after War on Terror, during War on Terror.
Right. again, it's reactive, but what is it a reaction to? That's the crux of all of this. Why now, Hollywood?
Yes.
I mean, we've been around for a while now. I mean, like forever. So why now? That's the thing.
Yes.
That's what you cover in your book.
Yes.
So please tell my audience, why now? Why are we
Why
important
now?
now?
I've been, trying to wrap my head around this. Why would
Right,
we get such a response now when there was Patriot Act? There was
right.
special registration, which was very similar to Muslim ban. There was
Mm-hmm.
war in Afghanistan, war in Iraq. There
Mm-hmm.
was the Abu Ghraib prison scandal. And it's not
Right,
that people weren't outraged by these things, but it
right,
didn't lead to social change.
right.
So there's something about Trump that
And
produced social change, and I think it's because he's so overtly racist.
so what you're saying is basically is that Hollywood is doing this to prove it's not racist,
I'm
or that
saying that
it loves Muslim just because Trump doesn't.
I would say that Hollywood collective, like a mass, a critical mass of people in Hollywood felt a sense of responsibility because of how explicitly racist and discriminatory Trump was. That if we were under Obama, it's not so bad. We have a black man as president. And I think people were under the illusion that just things weren't so bad. And his explicitness.
How about this? And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm just like throwing this out there. I think at some level, the US media was using Hollywood as damage control for the rest of the world because Trump was so bad. So I think that's what sort of comes into my mind because again, every other president was not this overtly terrible. So Hollywood didn't need to do damage control. But now with Trump as he was, I think that's where it boiled down to. It's just like, we can't make the US look that bad. Let's bring Muslims to the forefront.
I think that's a valid point. Yes, like he cannot represent us. We need to do
Right,
something about it. And so
right,
now we're
right,
going to show that we really are diverse and inclusive. We're going to include Muslims. We're going to include queer people. We're going to include Black people. We're going to do Latin.
right.
We're going to do it all.
Right, right. And that's what I mean, it sort of comes down to like with all these different representations, not just Muslim, like queer representation, like again, it's historically been terrible in Hollywood, like really, really bad. And now there's so much more of it, which is fantastic. But again, it's very reactive and all of these things. But then, when right now we have social media and everybody gets called out for their, I would say, having blinders on in a sense, because Hollywood has this tendency of having very one-dimensional characters. Doesn't
Yes.
matter who it is, very one-dimensional, especially when it comes to minority representations. So what started out like there started all sort of representation tests started coming out that a film, especially like representation of women, it had to be measured against these certain standards. And then there was the Oscar backlash of Oscar so white. There was no character, a minority character, person of color that was there. All of these then came. There was the representation tests that came out that if you wanted a real representation in movie, an authentic one, it had to measure out. And that's where your co-authored test, the Obeidi-Alsultany test, came in. So please explain to us, like, what's in that test and how do media companies sort of do the comparison, and do all of them do it?
Yeah, so the Obeidi-Alsultany test emerged when I was talking and working with Sue Obeidi, who's the director of the Hollywood Bureau at the Muslim Public Affairs Council. And MPAC holds workshops for Muslim writers to help them develop their scripts and connect them to Hollywood. And they also do a lot of consulting in Hollywood. And we were talking about how, wow, they're really trying. Hollywood's trying right now. But hey, did you see, that episode of 911 Lone Star where the firefighter in the hijab, she's on the job and her hijab falls off and her hair is flying in the wind? Like,
oh, wow.
Why are they doing that? What's up with that? Or, did you see on the Bull Type with the lesbian character that she wears a hijab, but then she has her cleavage showing? It's like, I don't really understand. Like, it seems like they're missing something. Or Did you see in Aladdin how they actually finally didn't do whitewashing in the 2019 live action?
Right.
Arab and Iranian and South Asian actors playing finally, but it's an Orientalist film, so it feels like
it is.
You get this, but you don't get that.
Right.
We'll give you non-whitewashed cast, but Orientalism, it's nice. What's wrong with it?
White people like it.
Yeah, exactly. It sells. We make money doing that. So we were talking like, wow, they're making effort, but there are all these instances where it just doesn't get far enough. It feels like this compromise. So we said, what if we made a test to just help them highlight the common errors? And I should mention that there are other tests out there that inspired our test. So there's a Bechdel test, which is like the original, and it's a test to measure representations of women. And it says that if there are two female characters, they talk to each other about something other than a man. Because historically, that's all women talk about. They don't know how to talk about anything else. And then there have been the DuVernay test after Ava DuVernay, which is about having people of color have fully realized lives. There's a Russo test for LGBTQ representation, an Isla test for Native American representation, and then ours is not the first on Muslim representation. There is a RIS test out of the UK, and it highlights the terrorism, oppression of women, all the key tropes to highlight to Hollywood, look, this is how you portray us. And there's also a new Muslim women's test out of the Gina Davis Institute, and it highlights oppression, leaving your religion, those kinds of issues. Ours is not trying to highlight the stereotypes, but we see you trying and failing. So we actually had these postcards made recently because
oh, wow.
Sue invited me to Sundance Film Festival to talk about this. Yeah, and so, and you'll notice there the good ones. We have, including Ms. Marvel in there. But we have 5 criteria, and so the first one says that the project that includes a Muslim character does not reproduce or reinvent old tropes, but explores new stories. So the idea here is we don't have to redo Orientalist stories. We don't have to redo terrorism with 3-dimensional characters, because that's also a trend. Let's tell the story, but there's backstory and it's a complicated, we don't need to do that. How about new stories? Okay. The next is that you should have at least one Muslim identifying writer on your team if you're writing about Muslims. Rather than tacking me on as a consultant at the very end when there's barely anything I can do, there are Muslim writers and creatives, and you can avoid all the mistakes that I mentioned earlier by having, if you're writing about the community, have people of that community as part of your team. The Muslim character is not solely defined by their religion. So religion can be part of who you are, but we noticed there were some shows where if you're Muslim, like people have this idea of who you are, and so you are a religious being or a political being, and there's nothing else to you. So very robotic. The Muslim character has a strong presence. So we do not expect lead Muslim characters in every show, but there is a tendency in doing diversity work that you just throw someone in the background. So Grey's Anatomy, for example, which has been amazing in terms of diversifying casts, and it's it's really shifted what's possible in terms of representation. They threw Dr. Kadri in the background, and when she was no longer on the show, didn't matter. But it's a larger practice in diversifying. Just throw it in the background. And the final one is that the Muslim character is portrayed with diverse backgrounds and identities, which means that not every Muslim has to be Arab, not every Arab has to be Muslim, not every, that we are a very diverse group of people, and to explore that diversity.
So, from my understanding, a good show with good Muslim representation should score 5 out of 5 from that.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So in your book, you've mentioned, if I can remember correctly, and my memory doesn't serve me very well, you mentioned like 3 shows that I can remember. First one was All American Muslims. Second was Shahs of Sunset. And the third one was Rami. And you had put in the others that you had mentioned, but these were the ones that you had explored in like a bit of details. And the fourth one I'm just going to throw in there because I love it, is Miss Marvel. So if you had to put these against the Sue Obeidi test, how would they score?
Okay, well, All American Muslims and Shahs of Sunset are in that category of responding to the stereotype confined expansion. Okay. Do they explore new stories in context? Shahs of Sunset explores a new story in context.
Right.
All American Muslim kind of does, but you're trapped in that patriotic thing. They have, Muslim identifying writers on staff. An Arab Muslim created All American Muslim. Mm-hmm. So, but Shahs of Sunset, I mean, it's a reality TV show. It's scripted in certain ways, but yes, it's it passes, I think, the second criteria. Are they defined by their religion? I mean, both are trying to show people beyond religion. In Shahs of Sunset, religion is irrelevant, at least if you're Muslim. Muslim character has a strong presence. Okay, they're front and center. Muslim characters portrayed with diverse backgrounds. There's a big criticism of All American Muslim because it sounded like, this. Mm-hmm. A lot of people said it should be called like Lebanese Shia All American Muslim or something like that. So, I mean, it's like on the surface it does pretty well, but But
there's a problem with both of them. And again, I haven't watched either of those. I had only heard of All American Muslims. I hadn't even heard of Shahs of Sunset. But when you described them in the book, I was like, well, geez Louise, how much do I wish to really point somebody in the direction of All American Muslims or Shahs of Sunset when it says, oh, do you have a good show in mind when it comes to Muslim representation? I was like, yeah, those 2 shows are not going to be it. So, I mean, I think that's the thing. Yeah. Even though on the surface they may like check mark majority of the boxes, but and that's the thing. This was very close to post 9/11 and pre-Trump. These were still going on the nominal Muslim and the patriotic Muslim tropes.
Yes, exactly.
So that's where the sort of the problem lies with all of these. I think when it comes to diversification, the diversification in these both of these shows was very constructed, if I had to put in that it didn't show the actual heart of Muslim representation. And again, I'm not saying that all Muslims sort of look like me or look like you, but the fact is these characters were also artificial, if I had to put any words to it. They were very artificial.
Yeah. I think with All American Muslim, it was, the person who made it, Mike Musallam, he's done amazing work. He recently did a romantic comedy. I'm forgetting the name right now, but it's a romantic comedy with like gay Arab Muslim men in it. Which, you never see anything like that. He's doing amazing work, and at the moment it was such an important show, but it was really trapped by, we're patriotic, we're good Americans, we're there's a police officer, there's a football coach. It was just really trying, and I got to meet some of the cast once on a panel, and they were like, we don't know why people are following us. We're just normal people living our lives, like picking up our kids from school and feeding them dinner, and we're not that interesting. But it was trying to show the public, look, they're not so bad.
And that's the thing. And you had mentioned this in the book as well. All American Muslims never got beyond 1 season. But I think, I don't know about Shahs of Sunset. Again, I don't follow any of these. But it went for 8 seasons. And you had mentioned the reasoning why it was. So like, All American Muslims were, in a sense, and that's not the words you used in the book, but they were boring. Yeah. I was like, it just showed Muslims as we are. We're going to Target as well. We're picking up like extra stuff that we shouldn't be probably getting from Target, but still. But Shahs of Sunset was this feeding into the American greed of materialism.
Yeah,
And that was fantastic. It was just it was a spectacle. It just, you threw the label Muslim on it, or like some semblance of Muslim on it, sort of situation. So again, I mean, if I had to like put it in my, like, that's not real diversity, but it's very consumable diversity, but it's not actual real diversity in representation. But again, it's just my opinion. I'm not the expert in this.
Yes. With Shahs of Sunset, it was a spectacle. It's wealth and bikinis and partying and fighting with your friends and arguments and throwing drinks at them. And it was, it fits a certain mold of reality television. While All American Muslim didn't fit a particular mold, and it was really nice, normal people going about their lives. So it didn't have the drama that I think viewers look for in reality television.
But what about Rami and Miss Marvel? How would you put those down when it comes to the Obeidi test? Sorry,
I mean, I feel like the 5 shows I mentioned, Ms. Marvel, Rami, Mo, sort of, Lady Parts, they don't need a test. And I'm not saying that just by virtue of being Muslim that you would pass the test, because there are plenty of Muslims who feed into stereotypes.
Right.
But these 5 shows that are written by Muslims are telling, different kinds of stories than the ones that we've seen. And I know I've spoken to a lot of Muslims, they don't like Rami, or they don't like this, and they don't like that.
Right.
And that's fine. We're all allowed to have our tastes.
Right.
But all of these shows are still really important when you understand the history of representations, that we've never had anything like this before. And they do push the needle forward.
Right. And I mean, I bring up Miss Marvel personally because, again, it was the first time that as somebody of Pakistani background, when I'd read about it, I wanted to watch it so desperately. And I didn't tell my family that what kind of background it had. It's like, you have to watch Miss Marvel with me. And that's the thing. That's what I think a lot of people don't understand. Their entire beings lit up when they saw themselves as full characters, as full beings represented on TV. It's something we have never experienced before. That's the importance of what you are trying to do with your book, with all that you do in representation studies, is that we have a right as well to see ourselves as full, complete people that are not just this or that. Because no person, no identity is ever this or that.
Exactly. The worst thing about Ms. Marvel is that it was only 6 episodes in the season.
I know, I need a season 2 so bad.
Yeah. But as you said, we want to see ourselves. And even if, for me with these 5 shows, even if I'm not Pakistani trans, like I love sort of, like I just love seeing that. I love that that story is told. And I often, in the many years that I've been giving talks about this topic, sometimes audience members ask me, Muslims have committed acts of terror, so what's the big deal of representing them? And the problem isn't that Muslims are portrayed as terrorists, but that we don't get out of other things. So white people do bad things, but if we have a serial killer show, we don't think all white people are serial killers and that the whole community has to respond.
Or worse, I mean, there was the series on Ted Bundy, and my mind is blanking out.
I know what you're talking about.
And people were romanticizing this really horrific man who committed acts of atrocities. Yes. And I was like, but he legitimately brutally killed and then cannibalized people. And
was it Dahmer?
Jeffrey Dahmer. Yes, sorry, my bad.
It's okay.
Like my brain. But yeah, there were people romanticizing him and how
That he's hot.
represent like it's hot. I'm like, no, no,
Mm-hmm.
no, y'all are
Yeah.
missing the point here.
Yes.
Like this is not okay. People were dressing up their kids as Jeffrey Dahmer, and I was like, y'all need help, man.
Wow.
Because no, please do not. But that's the thing. We don't get that luxury.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was like a white character, they could do bad things, but still not have an entire population be cast as that.
Right. Right. There's no collective responsibility or assuming that all white people are going to cannibalize, murder, and eat you.
Yeah.
It's not a thing.
It's
happened, but it's not a thing.
It's not a thing.
No.
But I'm so grateful that you took out time and talked to us about this. It's so important to everybody. Please go out and buy Broken, The Failed Promise of Muslim Inclusion. It's a fantastic book. And I'm not just saying because I'm interviewing you, but I usually don't read like nonfiction, but I couldn't put it down. I was like, I'm sitting there, I'm writing, like it's so informative and it's so relevant about really the heart of representation, and how it's more important now than ever with the world being globalized, diversity. The newer generation, they want this. They want to be able to see themselves and not just the same old stereotypes. So please, tell everybody where they can get this book, where they can find you to, tell us more. What do you know? Inform us, educate us.
Thank you. So you can buy the book at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you buy your books. NYU Press's website also. And you can learn more about me at my website, EvelynAlsultany.com. Thank you for having me, Shayla.
Oh, it's always my pleasure. I'll put all of those links in the show notes. They can see it on the screen as well. Thank you so much for being here with me, Evelyn. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in and heard us on their favorite podcasting platform or watched us on YouTube. Y'all take care of yourself and may peace be on you all.